Coke had such an incredible model. This is a company that just produces fountains of cash. It just gushes cash. You just can't lose money. You just send the syrup and you're getting massive. And so what the company did over the years is, generally speaking, what happens is that when you have businesses with great business models, you end up with dumb managers who do dumb things, because even when they do dumb things, they look really good because the business is so good. And so Coke would put their money into buying shrimp farms in Thailand and all these unrelated businesses, and almost everything they bought was a far worse business than the core business that they had. And in 1981, two guys came on the scene. Roberto Goizueta became the CEO, Cuban guy, and then Don Keough became under him the president. And so these two guys, and Goizueta was, there were some unusual people in the history of Coke going back the decades, but Goizueta was a very unusual guy. So he was really good at marketing and branding, understood this model really well, and he was really good at finance, understood capital allocation really well. Very unusual to have a numbers guy with a branding guy put together. And Keough was just a great operator. So what they did when they came on the scene in 81 is they started dumping all the other businesses. They got rid of everything Coke owned, which was not related to beverages. They got rid of. And the only thing they bought was they bought Paramount Pictures in 81. And then they realized about 5-6 years later that even that was dumped. And in 87 or 88, they dumped Paramount Pictures. So what Warren saw was from 1981 till his first purchase in 88, in 7 years, that these two guys, finally this was a company that had real capital allocators. And so what they were doing is aggressively buying back the stock. So what the Coca-Cola company started doing was they had this gush of cash coming in. The dividend was going on. It's one of the only companies that for 50 years, I think more than 50 years now, has raised the dividend every single year. I think there's no other company in the NYSE that's done that. There's some that have maintained it, but they've raised dividends every single year. So the first thing they did was they got rid of all the crappy businesses, sold them. And the second is they started aggressively buying back stock. So basically they took their cash flows, and Goizueta was brilliant. So Warren, I think, saw what was going on with Roberto Goizueta and Don Keough, coupled with all the other stuff I just told you. So now you finally had a business which had management that got it. And that's why they went in. And Roberto Goizueta himself owned 2.5% of Coke. So he actually had a significant economic interest and went from there. And now, the thing is, many of you are skeptical because of the whole sugar issue, right? Like if I ask you to drink Coke, most people say no, because I don't drink sugar, right? So they actually addressed that this year at the annual meeting. So Warren says that, he's 86 years old, in great health, been consuming 5 Cokes a day, cherry Cokes, since he was 6 years old. And so he dismisses all these health issues people bring up with sugar and whatnot. And he says that, he wishes he had an identical twin brother who spent his whole life eating broccoli. And he said, if I had this identical twin who would just drink broccoli and, plain water, then we'd have a test. We would see him at 86, and we'd see me at 86, and we'd see who was healthier. Okay, and basically his perspective was that, and I think he talked about it as a joke, but then Munger actually elaborated. He said it is very dumb to discuss negatives about a product without discussing the positives, right? So one of the things we have to realize as humans is that, yes, excess sugar has problems, causes health issues and whatnot, but having a Coke at certain times will add a lift to your step, right? And so that lift to your step, it's very difficult to quantify. And I think this is the reason why Warren says he wishes he had a twin brother, because the thing is, the guy lives such a happy life on all fronts that I think science doesn't fully understand the impact of low stress and happiness on health, right? So there's an impact there which we don't fully realize, but I'm pretty sure it's there. So yes, if you go wild and crazy and have huge amounts of sugar consumption and then that leads to health issues, there's a problem. But you can be Usain Bolt drinking 2 Cokes a day and be just fine. So there is so they don't see the sugar issue being a significant issue for Coke. And the second issue with Coke is they now have more than 100 brands. a large number of their brands, including Coke, have no sugar. And a large number of them even have no carbonation. So it's, when you get to these places, they're not pumping Coke over there. They're pumping Coke, they're pumping Dasani, they're pumping Minute Maid, they're pumping all kinds of products through that distribution engine, right? So it's not just sugar being pumped through, it's a sugar. And the other thing about the company is just to tell you how, the Coke has made a lot of blunders over the years. So one of the blunders they made is that they never wanted the Coca-Cola product to have anything but the true Coke product in it. So when there was a concern about sugar and people were talking about diet drinks, they did not want to create Diet Coke. And they did not want to call it Diet Coke. And they didn't want to take that beautiful bottle and the red color and mess with it. They didn't want to do that. So what they did is they called that product Tab. Okay, how many of you heard of Tab? Some of you, I see the older guys have heard of Tab. And for the longest time, Tab was this, stepchild. And then Tab became Diet Coke. Eventually they realized that we can put the Coke bottle with the diet without the sugar and might still work, and it worked. So they got to it. And then, we're getting to finally the part about what I call the GLOTS section. So how many of you read the GLOTS paper? That I think some of the folks have read it, right? So that was a speech which Munger gave where they told him it was useless. So Munger kind of inverts logic. So he says, how do you create a $2 trillion company with a $2 million investment, right? How do you create that? And the way he does it is he says, look, let's go in 150 years. He says in 150 years, how do you take 2 million to 2 trillion? And so he says 150 years, 2034, which is 150 years from when Coke was formed. He says that if there are 7 billion humans and they're consuming the 64 ounces, and then half of it is flavored, and then one half of the flavored comes to Coke, and we are getting about 2 cents a serving. Let's say by then with inflation, we're getting about 4 cents a serving. You run on the numbers that Coca-Cola at that point is making about 117 billion a year in profit, which would give you a market cap of 2 trillion. And so he says that's how we get to 2 trillion. And he says that, so what are the things we do to create that 2 trillion? He says, first of all, this guy GLOTS, who's setting up the Coca-Cola company, doesn't want to call it GLOTS flavored sugared water. He wants to call it Coca-Cola because he likes that name better. And so he creates a name, and he does a lot of stuff to promote the name. And the second is, he says in 1884, consumption of sugar and caffeine is well accepted in society. We have coffee, tea, lemonade. So we'll use sugar and caffeine because people like that. And using sugar and caffeine, we're going to create this product. And not just with sugar and caffeine, what we'll do is we'll give it a color like the color of wine to make it look kind of high end. And we'll give it carbonation to make it like champagne. Okay, so we'll put the sugar and caffeine and the color of wine and carbonate it. And now we've got a great product. And then we sell it really cheap so that everyone can buy it. And then he said, we have a choice. Do we create a beverage that's hot, like coffee or tea, or a beverage that's cold? And he said, well, cold beverages can be consumed in a much higher volume than hot beverages. And when you're kind of near the equator and really hot, you can have an almost unlimited ability to consume cold beverages. So he says it's a no-brainer. You go with cold. So he says you go with cold, and then he says now we go into the mental model of the way human brains are screwed up. And so he says the first is the association tendency, which is that put it in places where people are happy. Because when people are happy and they see Coke, then they associate happiness with Coke. And then we finally get to our next slide, which is my favorite slide, which is the Maryland slide, right? So the association tendency is if Maryland's drinking it, then definitely I want to be drinking it too, right? And so the association tendency, what Coke did in all its ads for the longest time, and even now, is they associated with celebrities, right? So in India, they'll pick some of the top Bollywood actresses, and the same thing here. They'll put these people in because the association tendency, humans kind of do very well with that. And then the social proof tendency of humans is another mental model, which is monkey see, monkey do, which is that when we see other people drinking Coke, we want to drink Coke too. And so show people having a good time with Coke and all of that. And then he says, do it both ways. Do it with fountains and do it with bottles. And then he says another thing we would do with the GLOTS beverage company is that we would basically create this aura around secrecy. So, you know, people think there's something unusual about Coke because the formula is secret. It's in a vault in a bank. And quite frankly, the secrecy means nothing. Because he says that eventually, with food science going the way it was going, everyone would figure out how to make something close to Coca-Cola. But by the time they figure it out, we would have had brand and other things come in, which would help us kind of keep the competition at bay. And he says the food chemistry that helps our competitors make a product like ours also helps us by reducing the unit cost. You know, like they went in the US from sugar to fructose, which was a lot cheaper, and they just made all their efficiencies in how they got there.